My first meet, I was scared.
I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me.
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
I might as well just get rid of it. So I went to the garage. I got an X.
Shh. I closed my eyes. I was crying so hard. And all of a sudden, he was there.
It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Dead more body. It's the living you gotta worry about.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every single day, Profiler Africa has become the space where we unpack the psychology and the science behind violent crime. Tonight, we are doing what we do best, and we are talking serial killers. We're heading to Mpumalanga, to a quiet community where a series of disappearances led investigators to a shocking discovery: multiple bodies buried on the suspect's own property. This is the Masoyi serial murder case, a disturbing blend of proximity offending, control, and investigative persistence. Joining Gerard and me online is Colonel Retired Kirsten Clark, former SAPS investigative psychologist and criminal behavior specialist who worked directly on the case and conducted the psychological assessment of the accused. So we really got an opportunity to tackle this one from a first-hand perspective. So make sure you get all your questions and comments in as we go through the program. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that join button to support us, or you can buy us a coffee using the link in the description. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, follow and rate the podcast. It really helps us keep Profiler Africa independent and digging into these sorts of cases on your behalf. Of course, as always, I am joined by the former head of South Africa's investigative psychology section at SAPS, Gerard Labuschagne. Good evening, Gerard. How's it going?
Paul, listeners, it is going quite well. Thank you very much. I was supposed to have my first Canadian driver's lesson for my driver's test today, but the person overslept. So that's my only downside of today, but the rest of it's doing well, thanks.
So see how inefficient people are in Canada. Must be terrible, Gerard. Must be terrible to be that side, having to deal with those kinds of problems.
I know it is.
We're so lucky to be here in South Africa. I spent the weekend watching this Ed Gein series on Netflix. I don't know if you've had the chance to catch it or if you've watched any of it. It's a hard watch, Gerard, but I really do encourage you to take a look, because I do feel like, first, it gets pretty gory, but they really do kind of deep dive into the psyche of this guy, and I'd be very interested to know your comments on it. But that's what I spent this weekend binge watching that, and of course we pre-recorded some episodes, or we did a nice pre-record this past weekend as well, for folks coming up in the next few weeks. So tonight we are talking about the Masoyi serial murder case, and of course joining us is your former colleague, retired Lieutenant Colonel Kirsten Clark. Let's say hello. Good evening, Kirsten. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much. Wonderful that you could join us again tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So tonight, let's just jump straight into it. Let me just remind everyone, if you're joining for the live, if you're a first-time viewer for the live stream, please do jump on the chat. If you've got any questions or comments as we go through the case, then please do let us know, and I'll keep an eye on that, and we'll drop those in throughout the conversation. But tonight we're heading to Mpumalanga, Kirsten, and what we typically do with these discussions is just help to contextualize the environment a little bit for those folks who are watching. You might think in South Africa that, in the suburbs, for example, I think you can get away with burying bodies in your garden a lot of the time, just because you don't even know who your neighbors are sometimes. But that's not necessarily the case when you get out to smaller rural communities.
Well, the area at Nombi Park, in which where Julius Mdwabe lived is a very, very rural area. It's very poor. It's a subsistence community, so lots of little small plots with vegetables, and there's lots of unemployment in the area. It's off road. There's no tarred roads there. You have to go in a 4x4. There's dongas on the side of the road that are really, really huge. But it's a really, really poor, very rural part of Mpumalanga.
Okay. And I get, again, the kind of environment where you know who the neighbors are.
Absolutely. Everybody knows everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the comments that we had coming out of this case was people who were his neighbors, who lived in the same road as him, who lived in the plots around him. They all said he was such a good guy, such a nice neighbor, so well known, so well liked. His family lived in the same area as well. His father was also a subsistence farmer. And yeah, everybody knows everybody there. So again, that's what, and if you had a look at the crime scene itself, it's not like there's walls around it. It's not like there's like chicken wire fencing, if I could put it that way. It's no trees. There's like, you can see right into your neighbor's house. It's that close.
We have got some images of the property, which we'll take a look at as we go through the discussion as well. How did this, when are we talking? When did this come onto SAPS radar? And how did this come onto SAPS radar initially?
So what had happened was there were young women that were going missing in this area. And they basically, what happened was once one of the later victims was reported missing to the police, they tracked her cell phone and they traced it to Julius's house, and that was when they basically came to the scene. They questioned him, and then they started digging up the garden, and that was when they found the 5 bodies that were buried on this little plot. And I got involved when Colonel Yanni DeLange phoned, and I was still based in Western Cape at that time, and he asked me to come up and interview Julius at the Nelspruit Correctional Center. So I came up, I did that, and then obviously we went out to the crime scene as well and had a look at everything there, met his family, spoke to them, and it was a really, really interesting case. It was probably one of the more serious ones that I did, because I joined SAPS in 2018 and this happened in 2019. So it was one of the more serious cases that I dealt with in my career at SAPS.
Okay. What were let's go back and talk a little bit about the kind of evolution of the case itself. How women were going missing in this community. Again, what was it that kind of brought these disappearances to the police's attention initially?
It wasn't really clear, if I could put it that way, like the whole sort of way that it played out. It kind of seemed that the last victim was the one that the police caught wind of and then kind of followed up on. I think that what happens in that community as well is that people do go missing and they don't necessarily report it to the police, if I could put it that way. But the families were definitely looking for the victims. But it took it took a few months until there was actually movement on the case where they traced the cell phone. So it was a slow-moving case initially, I think would be a good way of describing it.
Okay, Gerard?
I remember to unmute myself. Yeah, just 2 comments. I mean, what you said earlier about how people just thought he was a wonderful guy. I mean, how many times have we not just had that specifically with our serial murder suspects? They're not these monsters. I think it's partly why people get so afraid, because it literally could be the really nice person next door who, in every other aspect of his life, they're decent people, but they end up being caught for something like this. I mean, I'm sure you've had that in some of your cases.
Most of them, actually. If I'm completely honest, everybody that I've interviewed, I've kind of walked out I think there were 2 instances in my whole career at SAPS where I walked out of an interview and felt like, okay, that person was really scary. And one of them wasn't even a murderer, one of them was, but one of them wasn't a murderer. And they were like, they're literally the only 2 times. Every time, other times that I've interviewed, I've walked out thinking, well, that was actually quite like a personable person. He was quite articulate and, well-spoken and came across really charmingly. And it is frightening, I think, because they don't have there's nothing that kind of makes you go, okay, this person is dangerous. And I think that's what's so scary is that kind of, you go and sit across from this person, you talk to them and you hear about their life, because that's obviously what we do is when you a psychologist and you go into this, you ask everything about their life. Like, what was the name of your childhood dog? All the way through to how did you do in school? Did you have problems with bullies? Everything. And you walk away with like this little snapshot of this person. And oftentimes it doesn't make sense with what they've done, if I could put it like that.
Yeah, and we get to know them from reverse, because we get to know them before we've met them in terms of the investigation when you're still trying to catch them, or at least if you get called in once he's arrested, you first study the case, and then you get to meet the person. So, and I've always said that even if you killed 16 people and that took an hour per person, that's 16 hours of your life. That's not even half of a work week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What are you doing for the 99.9% of your life is the things you and I
the rest of it, yeah. But something else that I noticed, and I don't know if you felt this as well, but we obviously, as psychologists, you have to suspend whatever pre-notions you have of a person. So you study the case, you go through the files, you see all the crime photos, you see all the interviews, you see all the witness stuff, all the forensics, and then you still got to go into the interview and suspend whatever notions you have about this person. So you've got to go in, because you have to build a rapport really quickly. Like within the first 10 minutes, if you don't have that, you're not going to get it. And you kind of go in and you have to be nice, I think, is probably one way of putting it. Like you've got to get them to trust you really quickly to get the information that you want. So it's kind of like juggling 2 separate things in your head. And I've mentioned this to you before, that it's a lot like you got to go in thinking it's a puzzle. And how am I going to slot this into the greatest, like the broader picture of what the investigation is?
When you walk into a room to speak to somebody, do you consider it to be kind of 50-50, whether they'll kind of open up or not? Do you consider the tactics that you deploy to be really meaningful in which way it goes? Or does a lot of it just depend on the guy and, the other person and their mood, etc.?
A lot of times I would go in with a kind of strategy in mind, like I would have spoken about it with the team or the detective beforehand. But just as many times as I've gone in with a strategy, I've also kind of gone in and just seen where it goes from there, because a lot depends on the type of person you're speaking to. So if you're speaking to someone who's really arrogant, you have to be a little bit firmer and a little bit harder and more like challenging. Whereas if it's someone who is more timid and meek, you kind of have to sort of draw the information out of them. And that's a totally different way of doing an interview. I'm sure you felt the same, Gerard.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends what's your purpose. Sometimes, they picked up this guy as a person of interest, but they think it's him, they know it's him, but they don't necessarily have the physical evidence that's the smoking gun. So you're trying to get a confession, which is a different approach. Other times,
Totally.
You've solidly, you've found the bodies in the garden. He might be denying it, but there's no dispute. That might be a bit different versus the guy who's talking, and you just want to find as much about him as possible for our own purposes. We might have to testify at sentencing. So it also depends, what is your purpose there at that particular point in time is going to guide. But as you say, every interview, if you haven't prepared beforehand in some degree, whether it's reading the case material, speaking to people who've already had some interaction with him, to get a feel for what you're walking into, you're setting yourself up for failure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll play you. They'll play you given half a chance there.
I really want us to go down this road and explore this because, I mean, we don't typically, we'll often spend a lot of time talking about the nuts and bolts of the case itself and not kind of interrogate some of this stuff. So I'd like us to pursue this, but just to kind of get some clarity on how he came to be in custody. I mean, women, from what I gather, women started disappearing in roughly 2017. And the commonality that the police and the community, I gather, did the community kind of share with the police that the one common denominator seemed to be that they'd disappeared, that the women had all last been seen in the vicinity of this particular property?
Okay, it's interesting that you say that, because although there was this really big concern about these young women, and I mean, I think they aged from, I think it was like 15 to 24, 25. So they were quite young. The one common thing was, yes, they had gone missing from the community. Yes, a lot of them had been seen in Julius's company, but nobody seemed to make the connection between the two things, which was really strange because, like, afterwards they would say, well, yes, there were a lot of women that were coming in and out of his home, and often there'd be two staying there at the same time. And they'd all, I think his one friend even referred to him as being a bit of a ladies' man, if I stand to be corrected, but I think that's what the one friend said. And it kind of all went back. It hinged on that cell phone, the last victim's cell phone. That's kind of what pointed the police in his direction. There had been no link really before that, as far as I can recall. And it was kind of like the cell phone was the thing.
Oh, I see.
So it wasn't being investigated as a serial per se. And I mean, we often had these where sometimes you arrest the guy for one thing, and then it turns out he tells you about other bodies, and you realize you've just caught a serial. So it was one of those where you weren't really linking cases of missing people. Could be one person, and we've got a serial investigation to catch the guy.
No, I think it was literally a case of they dug up the garden and then realized, well, crap, there's like 5 bodies here, and we've got a serial on our hands. I think it was very much, how can I put it? If he hadn't kept the cell phone, I don't know if we would have caught him when we did. I think that was a serious error on his part, was keeping the cell phone, because he had tossed most of everything else that they had into the graves where he buried them. Interestingly enough, when I interviewed him, he said if the cops hadn't come and questioned him and then arrested him, he would have carried on doing it, which I thought was really interesting. And the fact that he killed so many women in such a short space of time relatively was also quite an interesting thing, because he started in 2017. He was arrested sort of mid-2019, as far as I can recall. It was mid-2019. And so that was it was quite a few victims in a short space of time as well. So there were just a lot of things that were kind of interesting about the case as a whole. It was just, it was really interesting and really perplexing in a lot of ways, because there just hadn't been that linkage that was made. But that often happens.
But look, we must also, and we must remind people that in South Africa, disappearances, these types of occurrences are not uncommon.
No.
People disappear.
And if you think of it, this is very similar in a way, in terms of what you're saying, Kirsten, people not realizing, like was it that Sifiso Nkwanasi guy, the guy who killed the sex workers downtown Joburg? Nobody even knew that they were missing sex workers. Nobody picked up that link that there's young ladies going missing and they're all street workers, until they find one body of a girl he'd been brought back, and then when the cops, somebody's cleaning up after the cops have left from the first body, they find the second one, and then you start to search and they find out 6 bodies in total. So those things do unfortunately happen. Whether there's a problem with people not reporting or the cops not linking missing persons possibly being the same thing, I mean, that'll depend, on case to case. But obviously what's interesting for me about this, which, I mean, I'm trying to think in the 120 serials I worked on, murder series, I'm trying to think if I ever had one that was burying the bodies in their own garden in one place. It's normally that sort of, it's a general area where you might find bodies, but it's like a piece of felt and never so
Yeah.
close, so local, such a small area. And I'm trying to think, I don't think I've ever had one where the person buried on their property. So that's very unique, just that aspect.
I just want to jump into sorry, Kirsten, go ahead.
Yeah, correct. What I think was interesting about this particular one and the bodies being buried in his garden was it seemed to be very much driven by, well, they're dead and I now have to get rid of them. I think it was a matter of, well, this is convenient and I can't get the bodies out of here. He didn't have a car. He didn't have access to transport. It's quite a populated area. So there was like, what do I do with them? I think it was very much a case of, okay, so yeah, I buried, I have to get rid of the bodies.
Yeah.
And these weren't strange. Sorry, I don't know if we've touched on the victimology. These were people that he knew to some degree versus a typical serial, which is a stranger you approach, offer a job, lead them away. So I think that also the dynamics of the nature of the relationship probably made it such that you get them home, kill them there, and now what do I do?
Which I was, if I might. Oh, sorry.
He reportedly had sex with all of them. So they were not unknown to him.
Okay, yeah. No, I was just going to drop in there, Gerard. You jumped the gun on me. I was going to let Marlene ask that question because I wanted to do a little say a little hello to everyone who's joining us on the chat. We do see you. I am taking a look at your questions there, and I thought that was a great time to ask exactly that question. Were the women known to him? Let's clear that up quick.
Okay, so if you have a look at the victimology, what is, like, as I said, what was interesting was he had sex with all of the women. He was charged with rape in the trials themselves. But if you have a look at the chronicity of everything, so there was actually a rape charge that had been laid against him that had been withdrawn at one point. So that was in 2017. But obviously that was withdrawn. So then that case wasn't pursued anymore through the courts. Then what happened was he was dating a woman called Bonasile. And he, at the same time that he was dating Bonasile, he was having a relationship with her sister Benele. And what basically happened was Benele then said that she was going to tell her sister that they were sleeping together. And that was when he killed Benele. So she was, I think, the youngest victim. Then after that, he had a relationship with one of Bonasile's friends. And she would come and ask him for money after they had slept together. And he would often give her money. And then the one day she came, they had sex. She demanded money. He said he didn't have any. So she then went and told Bonasile what was going on. And then the next day she came back and she asked for money again. And that was when he killed her. According to his recollection of stuff, he says the next 3 attacks were almost like a blur. He can't really describe what happened during the attacks. He can't say how they happened other than that he beat them. But it was definitely, the link was, the whole link between all of these women was that he had sex. He was having a sexual relationship with all of them. Yeah, it was quite scary. So just from the point of view that Benele had gone missing and he went to, he was with Bonasile, her sister, who was his partner, and they were, worried about Benele, and meanwhile she was, under the tomatoes in this garden, quite literally.
Okay. We will. I wanted to bring up an image of him, and then maybe we could actually take a look at the property, and you can relay. Maybe you can relay a little the story that you shared. Now that we brought up the tomatoes, when we have a look there. But he was young. How old was he when he was caught? I mean, you can see he's young. He's a good-looking guy.
He was 25. So this, which is early for most serial killers. They typically tend to be more later 20s, early 30s. So he was quite young, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
He is a good looking guy. Came across as being, softly spoken, quite polite. Yeah, he's not your, how can I put it? Like, okay, he was definitely weird in that he had a different flavor to the other serial killers that I've interviewed, because they often come across as being quite antisocial or narcissistic, whereas he was more detached and distant. And the only emotion that he could connect to strongly was anger. So he didn't have, it was a bit like talking to an Etchy sketch, I think is maybe the best way of putting it. So there was a person in front of you, but there was nothing behind it. There's this complete disconnect, this distance, this kind of not understanding emotions of other people, but only being able to connect to anger within himself. So he was definitely, like, as I say, like a different flavor, because serial killers have nuances. I don't know how else to put it. I don't want to say make it trivialized by saying it's ice cream, but it is a bit like that. They have certain common characteristics, and he was the one that stuck out for me because he was different in his emotional detachment from everything in terms of relationships, emotions, people, things around him. That was really interesting.
When you sit down to interview him, where first of all where were you when you interviewed him, and over how many sessions did you speak to him, and did he open up to you pretty easily?
So I saw him at the Nelspruit Correctional Center because he had obviously been arrested by then. So it was in an office at the center. You're only allowed a certain amount of time, so I wasn't able to see him for maybe as long as I would have liked to. That they kind of rush you in and rush you out, if I could put it like that. You wait long, but then they kind of push you through the thing. I would have liked to have seen him again. I probably spent about 3.5, 4 hours with him.
Okay.
But he was very forthcoming. He stated it very matter-of-factly. This is what happened. I hit her. She fell down. I realized she was dead. I had to get rid of the body. So I dug a hole in the garden. And when he was asked, well, why are you digging so many holes? He would just keep telling people, well, I'm building a new latrine. I'm building a new toilet. And he was, he just kept moving the bodies around. What was interesting, though, was the day we got there, and the day that the police came and they did the initial search, there was actually another hole that had just been dug, which I thought was interesting. He maintained it was for a pit toilet, but there was another hole that he had started digging right along that line of bushes on the right-hand side of the pictures. There was that line of bushes. There was a hole just to the right of that. So that I thought was quite interesting. But he said there were no other victims at the point. He wasn't planning on burying anybody in there. But I did think it was interesting that he had dug a new hole.
Yeah. Just explain to us what we're looking at here, Kirsten.
Okay, so this was the view of the plot taken from the road. So the one on the right is taken from the road, looking down at the plot, and then the one on the left was taken from where his house was. So this is the extent of the property. It's a really small little patch, and all of the bodies, if you have a look on the right-hand picture, 3 of the bodies were at the bottom, where you can see the ground. You can just see the ground's been dug out on the one side. The other 2 bodies were actually located under a concrete slab that he had outside the house, where he had built like this little shower area. So 2 of the bodies were laid side by side under the concrete slab. And then the other 3 bodies were at the bottom of the garden, next to, like sort of under the vegetables that he planted.
The image on the left here, does it give you a sense of, is that the neighbor's house there? So that's another property, kind of, that's as close as the nearest neighbor would be.
Yeah, so there were houses all the way around, basically.
Okay. All right, I'm going to skip on to the next photo.
Okay, so this was his house. So what happened after he was arrested was the community came and torched the house. So this was what was left of it. if you have a look at the picture on the left-hand side, you can see like a bit of the building that was left. So there was actually a wall around the shower area, but you can see parts of the concrete slab that they dug up to find the other two victims. The slab wasn't poured as a concrete slab. It was more like laid on top of, they were sort of buried in graves, and then the slab was laying on top. But as you can see on the picture on the right, that's from the bottom of the garden looking up the road, and the car parked on the right-hand side, that's the road itself.
Okay.
So small and very close.
Yeah. All right. And then we've got this I assume is once the bodies have been removed, is it?
Yes, so the bodies were removed already, but these were the holes that were basically left behind. So these are the ones that were the closest to the house where the shower had been. So there were two distinct graves. They weren't very deep, but that had the slab laying, like the slabs lying over it. So they kind of covered. And interesting enough, he would have like walked past this or on this to get through his front door. So that was also something that was really interesting to me.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think we've got just a map of the whole area, and you can maybe just point it out for us if everyone can see that, right? Okay. Just some of the
the stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So so the little tree thingies are his vegetable stuff. Obviously the square at the bottom is his house. If you have a look, the blue marks at the top of the page are where 3 of the bodies were found, and then the 2 under the shower slab are at the bottom.
why my camera's not connecting.
Sort of there.
Sorry, guys. That's never.
We
Hi there, folks. Hopefully you're all back with us. Apologies for that, but for the first time ever, my internet just went completely dead for no reason whatsoever. So apologies, but if you're still with us, thank you very much. Please do post your questions and comments. There, folks. Do hit like and subscribe. And also, let me just mute that. Okay, great. Now, where were we? Let's pick up where we were. Let me say hello to Gerard and Kirsten, who are back with us as well.
Hey.
Hi, guys. Sorry about that. Okay, that's the joys of live. But for those folks who aren't watching the live, this will magically disappear in the edit when I chop this chunk out of the middle. In the panic to try and get everything back up and running, I did lose my place a little bit. I think we were looking at the garden diagram. Hey, so let me just get back
Diagram,
to,
yeah.
yes.
Let me get back to that. Let's get there. Okay, here we go, guys.
And Kirsten, while Paul's doing that,
yes,
if you
please.
can maybe just work in.
That at the time he was drinking heavily, and he got angry with all of the women, and he hit them. The way he described it was, for example, with Benele, he punched her in the face, and then she fell down and she was dead. The second one he described was also the same. The friend of Bonaciole was the same kind of thing. So he got angry with her when she asked for the money. He had been drinking already in the morning. He hit her and she fell down. What was interesting about that was he then said that he tied her hands with white shoelaces, and then he went to go and buy beer at the shebeen. And then he came back and she was still not moving, and then he realized that she was dead. So it seems as if it was blunt force trauma, but the autopsies could never, like, I mean, two of the bodies were so badly decomposed they couldn't even identify them. They had to send the bones overseas. It was like this. None of them were really intact, if I could put it that way. So it's very hard to sort of determine cause of death, obviously, without like a body.
Yeah.
But it seems like it was blunt force trauma. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's not uncommon. You know, we'll find bodies in serial cases.
Yeah.
Sorry, we got this bit of a delay. So it's not uncommon. I mean, you've had it before in serial cases where nobody can determine the cause of death, but because of their location geographically, the victimology, maybe clothing left in a similar way, they were still charged with the murder. So you don't have to have a clear autopsy report that indicates this was most likely a natural death for it to be charged with murder. Just contextual. The other cases kind of like build it. And of course you have what he says, that I killed these people. So that's definitely going to, if that's done in a proper way, be admissible in court, even if he denied ever saying that voluntarily later. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, he was pretty forthcoming about everything. Yeah, he definitely, he had a history of violence. There had been another relationship that he had been in where he had gotten really, really angry with the girlfriend, and he went and he set fire to her father's house. So that was also, there was a history of violence. I think he had been in a fight where he had knifed someone. There had been another case where he had gotten involved in a brawl at a tavern with 7 other people. So he definitely had a history of violence. And he was quite a small man, actually. He wasn't like terrifyingly large or overwhelmingly, intimidating. He was, it's just like he seemed to have this streak in him that when he got really angry, he got really, really angry.
So you mentioned that he had that previous rape case, which was withdrawn. Was he in custody until it was withdrawn?
As far as I know, he wasn't. There wasn't a lot of information available on that case, other than to say that it had been enrolled at court and then was later withdrawn.
And it's so interesting how many of our serials have had this. Like, I think Sitole had the same thing. He was arrested for a rape. He served time for after conviction. But the Sifiso Nkonana that we spoke about just now, in custody, and then the case was withdrawn after like 6-7 months. The quarry guy, Jabulani Nyahuza, also in custody for like 2 or 3 years, then case gets overturned. So that's often something we see, that they have this earlier either rape conviction or rape arrest, awaiting trial, then it's withdrawn, and then it's as if that is like a catalyst for them to start the murders. And that's something I've often just noticed in some of these guys.
Yeah, it's often a thing. Like if we find a previous rape charge or like a rape conviction, that's always a red flag. It's kind of indicated that if you can go in that direction once, the chances are you'll probably do it again, but do it more permanently this time. You know,
Yeah,
so if
yeah.
you rape before, it then moves into like rape and murder. That
And
definitely is a pattern I've seen.
and then, so when did somebody then realize this is a serial? Was it only after he was brought up, or do they start digging and then they find a second body, or was he caught for
Yeah.
the first one, interviewed, and said, "Oh, by the way, there's a bunch of bodies there under the thingy"? So when did it first become realization?
As far as I can remember, the police came and said to him, "Look, you've got the cell phone of the one woman. We know you have it because we've traced it here." And I think that was when he said to them, "Okay, look, they are, you know, she's in the garden." And then they started digging and they found the subsequent. But I think he pointed out as well. He did do a pointing out.
And did he
I do
tell
remember
everybody, this is Jane, this is Mary, so that, or how do they link identities to those victims?
So two of them have not been identified, but they presumed to be two of the women that went missing in that area who had been known to visit him at his house. So but three of them were identified via DNA.
Okay, so fast forward, you're called in to interview him. It goes to trial. Did he plead guilty, or was there evidence presented to convict him?
So he pled guilty on all 5 charges of murder, and he never testified, which, I mean, I know that's common with a lot of these cases, is that the accused don't actually take the stand, which I think is very sad for the families because they often feel that they don't get closure for what happened. They don't actually know what occurred and how it played out. So that's always a bit sad. But yeah, he pled guilty. He received life sentences for each one of the murders and then 25 years for obstructing justice. But what was interesting about this case was that the judge said that the sentences couldn't run concurrently. So he effectively got 150 years.
That's interesting. And did you testify?
Funny enough, they didn't call me. So they used the report to do sort of further investigations. So it gave the recommendations at the end of the report were for them to start digging into the ex-girlfriends. He had 5 children as well. So he needed to, part of the thing was that the police needed to go and interview all his ex-girlfriends to find out about his history of abuse, speak to his mother and father, just get a lot more information in terms of what his past behavior was. So it was more part confession, admission, part recommendation, if I could put it like that.
Pierre did actually ask what his family background was like. Did you have time to speak to him much about his kind of childhood and anything that influenced him in the earlier phases of his life?
Okay, so his father was a subsistence farmer, still lives in the area. His mother was unemployed, and also obviously his parents were married. I think they'd been married 25 years at the time that I interviewed him. And the family followed the traditional African faith, so it was a traditional wedding. He had 4 siblings, one of whom committed suicide in front of him in the street outside their house when he was 17. And that apparently had a huge impact on him as well, because it was his older brother. He's the second of 5 children. And he saw his brother committing suicide over a fight that he had with his girlfriend. And I think that did affect him. Seeing that did affect him. He described his childhood as being fine. He said his father was strict, but wasn't abusive. And that there were, he had difficulty at school. He'd been sort of pulled aside his parents had been pulled aside during grade 1 and said, look, he has problems with reading and writing. He then failed grade 4, 5, and 6, so he repeated those grades, but he left school with a grade 8 education. And from there, he went and he worked at, he was a Just trying to check. I think he was, just give me a second. He initially worked, oh, that's right. So it's quite close to the Kruger. So he worked as a maintenance guy at a lodge, and he was there for 5 years. And he got sacked from that job because he had gone to do a private job in Nelspruit, and then he had forged a doctor's note. So he got sacked from that job. Then he went and he worked as a TLB driver for a little bit. And that was for about a year. Then he lost that job, and then he helped his dad on the farm for a little bit. And then when he had been arrested, he had been working for 3 months as a security guard at one of the Kruger Park lodges. So that was literally where he was working before he was arrested.
Okay.
So Kirsten, if I understand, sorry, he'd lived in that area his whole life. So it wasn't as if you need to do investigations in Bloemfontein, where he'd been living up until 3 years ago, and see if he did something similar there.
No, he definitely stayed where, that was the area that he lived in. He grew up there. He worked there. That was his life, basically. I don't think he left the area, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was kind of in that area of like the greater Masoyi area, if I could put it, that way. Yeah.
In that regard, what does this case reveal about proximity offending, comfort zones in serial killers? I mean, do you think he's the kind of guy that would have offended outside of this, what seemed to be a comfort zone for him? Would you describe it as that?
Was. Yeah, I definitely think it was a comfort zone for him. One of the interesting things about why he actually buried the woman in the garden is that he had witnessed a man being tried by a kangaroo court a little while before he killed Benele, so the first victim. And he was very worried about what the community would do to him if they caught him after discovering that he had now done this. And I mean, you could see the community went and burnt his house down afterwards. There was a lot of anger, and a lot of, the community was really upset about what happened. So I think there was that fear that kind of played into it. But then that automatically makes me think, well, he knew what he was doing was wrong, because he hid it knowing that there would be this consequence afterwards, that if the community found out what he was doing, he would probably be a dead man. So I think it was definitely comfort, but I go back to this idea of he didn't have transport. He couldn't. I think that the access to the victims was like close by. I think, so he kind of, I mean, and these are women who knew him. It was kind of like not a predatory kind of thing where I'm going to go out and I'm going to find someone and I'm going to take them to this place and I'm going to kill them, which normally is the way that it works. They acquire someone at a taxi rank, for example, and then take them off into a sort of sugarcane or bush area and then kill them. This wasn't like that at all. This was, close to home the whole time. The crimes took place there. He buried them there. His graveyard was his back garden.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems interesting because, we know that it's in rural communities like this, there are vulnerable people, kind of not necessarily it's not that hard to come across folks who are particularly vulnerable. So you are, it's quite a choice to choose victims who and people and that people know.
That was interesting because why choose those victims? They were, some of them were seen at his house. Some of them were known through, that people knew that he knew them. It seems like such a risky choice for me that if I was going to be doing these things, I would make sure that I choose strangers who have no connection to me whatsoever. This seemed to be weird from that perspective, that he had chosen his victims, or maybe, that the victims ended up being these women that he had known. And that was really strange. And it was interesting when I interviewed him because he was very, and I know I mentioned this earlier, he was very disconnected from what he had done. So even when he was telling it, no emotion to what he was saying. It was like he was just stating fact. Like this is what happened. I was angry, so I hit her, and then she fell down. So it was very. It wasn't blasé, but it was very just like, okay, I'm going to recount the events to you. He came across,
Matter of fact.
honestly, yeah, he came across as being quite schizoid, if I could put it that way. So, like, completely devoid of emotion. It was really interesting.
And how did his account actually line up to the forensics? Did you get the sense his account was accurate?
Yes, up to the point where he said, he said he punched them once. I don't think it was once. Not from the damage that we saw to the to the bones that were left. It seems like it was bad enough that it had actually damaged the bones, the skeleton that was left. So I think his idea of 7 flies with one blow wasn't really accurate. I think it was definitely more than that, but I think the way that the story kind of played out did make sense. Yeah, I do think that.
Was the cause of death? Were they beaten to death? I mean, was there strangulation? Was there?
As far as I know, the hyoid bones were intact, which means that strangulation probably didn't occur, but I'd need to double check that. As far as I can remember, it was blunt force trauma. There were skull depressions and things like that. So, yeah.
Okay. Gerard?
Horrible way.
No. I mean, as we know, most of our serial use strangulation, but they have some that haven't. And I guess depending on the circumstances, he might have felt, based on his own inner way he wants to kill them, or the circumstances, that blunt force is quick, incapacitate quickly, and then. But yeah, one punch. I mean, unless you're like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, you're probably not going to kill somebody with one punch. I mean, it just don't work like that.
He's shorter than me, so, and I'm probably bigger than he is. not to be funny, but he was a good sort of like bit shorter than me, and he's not a largely built man. So when he said to me, I punched her once and she fell over and she was dead, I was like, no, I don't think that's how it happened. Definitely. It was so hard to tell because of the deco. It really, really was. I mean, some of them were just literally bones.
Was SAPS Victim Identification Center involved in helping trying to ID the victims?
I believe they were, yeah. I think they had to be, because, I mean, there were no fingerprints, no, I think it was down to like dental DNA kind of stuff, because it was so bad. Yeah. I mean, you couldn't even recognize them as being bodies, really. It was just sort of like a muddled pile of bones. He put a lot of rubbish in the graves, like their clothes, and then there were lots of alcohol bottles, lots of just like scrap stuff that was thrown into the grave with them. He started burning his victims towards the end. That wasn't something he had done before. So he had killed them and then he tried to burn them to sort of like, I think he was getting really worried the community would catch on at that point. So he actually burned definitely the last one and maybe the fourth one.
Yeah, which is not also, I mean, that gets rid of the superficial stuff, but I mean, to burn a body to the point where there's nothing left. I mean, if you look at like these places that do, what do you call those things? Crematoriums. I mean, like that is such an it's a high heat that you can't get from just like a fire, so it's never.
And you still get bones. Yeah, and you still get bones in a cremation. Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely. But it was interesting from the point of view that he tossed like all this rubbish and all the alcohol bottles and everything, like there was all this rubbish that was put into the graves with them, and bags and plastic, and there was just a lot. And I couldn't get him to talk about whether that was part of like disposing of the bodies, if that was part of the ritual, or did it mean anything to him to do that? Like he couldn't quite understand why I was going in that direction. He said no, that had nothing to do with it.
You mentioned that the community set fire to the house. Was that at least after the police had like processed the scene for evidence, or was that before they'd had the opportunity to do that?
So they processed the scene. I think they would have liked to have gone back. The community reacted really quickly. I think that the police would have liked to have gone through it again, just to make sure. But I think the community torched it like pretty soon after he was arrested. There was quite a crowd that had gathered there on the day that the police vans come. And I mean, for the police vans to come to a community like that, it's not common at all. So even the day that we went, I mean, obviously we stuck out like sore thumbs, poor Colonel DeLange and myself. And we were there and we were looking at everything. And we had a crowd of people who were there as well. So it was interesting.
Guys, sorry about that. I've just been I'm in the background here, just fighting all sorts of demons. I don't know what's going on, but the internet hates me. We never have these issues, and just tonight I'm just getting a barrage of them. So apologies for that. I just wanted to acknowledge guys in the chat and just see if we can drop in some of the questions here that folks have been posing from. Gabe plays games. How's it, Gabe? Nice to see you.
Gabe's got good questions.
Did he seem manipulative during the interview?
Funny enough, he didn't actually. Like you typically see that more with your narcissistic antisocials. He was really divorced from the whole thing. Like, I've got to go through this. I'm just going to tell you what happened and whatever. It was more that kind of attitude as opposed to I'm going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. And, because I literally said to him, tell me what happened. Let's start with the first one and just carry on from there. And he told the story without a lot of without much prompting. And then I went back and clarified details and he was like, well, yes, that did happen. Okay. And I forgot this and we must add that in. So he didn't seem manipulative in the interview, which is quite unusual. I'm used to being put in a position where I have to, file a question here during the narrative and then come back to it later and ask it in a different way and then try and challenge the two together. This didn't happen. He was really forthcoming and just kind of like laid the story out as it kind of happened in his head.
Marley ZN says, so he was in essence a GBV serial killer. And did you guys fear any evidence had been destroyed in the fire?
Absolutely. I think that there was evidence that could have related to the COD. So definitely the cause of death. I think that would have been something that we would have really wanted to know. And the possibility of him having raped them like pre or post-mortem, that would have been really, really interesting to know as well. And because most of the soft tissue had disintegrated, it was difficult to see if there had been any mutilation. So we don't know if he, mutilated their genitals or if there were bite marks or ligatures or restraints. We don't actually know. The only mention he made of the, restraints was when he tied up the second victim with shoelaces. So we could have missed out on a lot of evidence that would maybe have made the meaning of the case deeper in terms of being able to figure out what was going on psychologically.
Yeah. Just kind of leading on from the question of Gabe's talking about, was he manipulative rather than, as opposed to manipulative, maybe withholding, the stuff that really was important to him, happy to tell the nuts and bolts, but maybe not wanting to go into what really got him off, if you like, or.
Yeah. I think that the overwhelming insight feeling that I got from him, and this is very unscientific, I know, but it was a case of he did it the first time and it worked and he hit the body and it was really easy. And then I think the second time it wasn't as bad. And he said the third, fourth, and fifth was like a bit of a blur. And by then it was like, well, this seems to be a good way of solving these problems that I'm having with the women in my life. That was more the gist of what I got. But there was also the sense of, I hit her once and she died. I think he didn't want to go into, well, I killed her by beating her to death. I don't think that was a point that he could kind of go to. I think the the chronicity of everything, and maybe like the bare bones of what he had done, he was able to talk about. But I mean, he mentioned that he kept, after the first murder, he kept seeing things, like he had almost like flashbacks where it was really bothering him, and that lessened after each successive murder. It bothered him less and less and less. Just my feeling.
You know, the very violent murders, from my discussions, I'm always under the impression that if there's an excessive violence, that is a personal thing. I mean, that's how there's a relationship there, and there's a reason for that anger and that rage. That's something to do with the relationship or the etc. It seems odd, as in a serial. Is it odd in a serial to see that kind of modus operandi, which would maybe imply that there's kind of a big emotional a big emotional release at the, whilst committing the murder?
You know, in cases where the victims are strangers, it is possible that they're surrogates for someone else. Okay. So they could potentially, for example, maybe a man who commits these rapes and murders against women, but at some point there was a woman who had done something or hurt him badly, or so it kind of goes back to then the woman that he then kills becomes surrogates for the one that hurt him. Or the first one hurt him and he killed her, and then it kind of sets the stage, and then all the subsequent victims would take her place. Yeah. So that is possible as well. But this seemed different because he did know all of them.
Yeah. And then you mentioned you got the impression earlier, you were talking about almost kind of schizo, if you like. Now, in the instance where somebody is diagnosed with that, is it, would they have genuine loss of memory of the act itself? You mentioned that, but what would, sorry, let me just leave it there. Let me just leave it there. Sorry, let me just leave it there. I was going to extend the question, but let me just ask that.
So if we say someone is schizoid, as a clinical psychologist, we mean that they have almost like schizoid personality traits or a personality disorder. So it's more part of their personality buildup. So someone who's schizoid doesn't see the point in having relationships with other people, not deep, meaningful relationships. So they'll have relationships because they kind of know that they have to, and that's kind of the way that the world works. But there's no connection to understanding emotions in other people because they don't experience those emotions in themselves. So they've got no reference point for being able to understand that. And they're typically quite distant and keep to themselves and will interact with people where it serves a purpose for them or gets their needs met. But otherwise, they're very much like these loners that kind of exist but don't seem to really have much connection to emotion at all. And that was interesting to me because he was the one and only one that I found when I was doing this job that was schizoid. Everybody else was definitely more antisocial, narcissistic, but he had, it was just, like I mentioned, it was like talking to an Etchy sketch. Like there would be something and then it would be gone. Like there's like nothing to hang anything on.
This was the second part of my question that I got tongue-tied on is, could you make that diagnosis in the amount of time that you had to speak with him? Are you confident that that's a fair or is that just kind of?
It was a clinical impression.
Okay.
So during our clinical interviews, the questions we asked are designed to get, number one, the most information that we possibly can about the person. But any psychologist worth their salt should be able to make some kind of even if it's a different bunch of differential diagnoses, you should have something on the table by the time you walk out of an interview. And I feel fairly confident that he did have schizoid traits. I think what you were also trying to say is, would that count as being like an insanity plea? Was that kind of where
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
No.
Multiple
Okay, the answer to that is
personalities,
no.
insanity. Yes.
No. Okay,
Any
so
of
no,
that.
absolutely no. It's definitely not. It's like
Okay.
saying someone has autism and therefore can't be found guilty of a crime. It's very much that. It might play a role in mitigation of sentencing, but in this particular situation, I don't think it would have. Certainly, as a defense psychologist, there's no way I could have made that fly in court.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, what was with your interview? I mean, were you making an assessment for the court?
No, it was for the police. So it was to guide further investigations. They wanted to know a little bit more about him and to try and figure out if there was more information that he was prepared to tell me than he maybe was prepared to tell the IOs. Because sometimes with psychological interviewing, you tend to get a lot more information and a lot more detail. So the whole purpose of that was to interview him with the view of getting more information and then giving guidance to the police on where they should look next for further evidence to basically back up the case.
Okay. Did he keep any trophies, Gabe is asking?
Well, the cell phone was one.
Okay, yeah.
The cell phone was one. Interestingly enough, he didn't actually. He, from what we could gather, I think if the police had gone back, they may have found some more stuff, but he generally put the victim's clothes in the grave with them. So he didn't seem to keep trophies in the classic sense of keeping them.
Yeah. Although I guess, but again, I mean, Marlene then mentioned to Gabe, I would imagine the bodies were the trophies themselves. I mean, is that a fair thought?
Good point. Yeah. Can you imagine? Well, I mean, I did imagine that he had come out of his house in the morning and maybe have his cup of coffee looking over his garden. What thoughts would have gone through his mind?
Yeah. Do relate to us the story you were telling us before we went live.
Oh, that was crazy. That was so crazy. So we finished up everything. We had seen the family. We had walked the plot, gone over the crime scene, and figured out, this is where one body was buried, all the rest of it. And then his family gave me a really large bag of tomatoes. But the problem was the tomato plants were all around the area where the graves were in the garden. So I felt like I couldn't say no. So I had to take the tomatoes with me, and I sat with them on my lap all the way back to Johannesburg. And I just remember turning to Colonel DeLanger and saying, I don't know, I can't eat these. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. And it just kind of like, I understood the gift, but what it was, like, forever in my mind, Julius and Ndwabe is going to be like the tomato serial killer for me. Like, that's just how I see it. It's like, you know how you name them because it's easier to, you just kind of, you have to have that distance from the case. Otherwise you go a little bonkers. And for me, he's the tomato serial killer. Will always be.
I'm going to have to change the thumbnail then. I think we'll, maybe we can dub him the tomato serial killer for the future.
I have to say, he had the most amazing vegetables though. The stuff that he had in his garden was growing really, really well. I don't know if it was because I wasn't I was searching for a word, but that's probably a good one.
I don't know if you recall the movie. I think it's called The Last Supper. Where they hold dinner parties and then they invite guests over and then they murder the guests and then they bury them in the garden and plant. I think they plant rose bushes or something over them, but they grow abundantly.
I read somewhere.
We're not turning into a gardening show, guys. Okay.
I read somewhere that if you want to hide a body in your garden, you should plant a cycad on it.
Oh, really?
Simply because they can't be moved without a permit. I don't know how to do that.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, well.
It's a bit of a load.
Exactly. We've got some more. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Katz and Katzen for your contribution. We appreciate you. Helen's with us. Hi, Helen. Sorry I'm late. Put the lad to bed. Well, welcome. It's always lovely to have Helen with us. Christelle is a first-time liver. So glad you guys are back at it. So interesting hearing true crime stuff in the SA context. Let's see. Do you think that he hated women, and were you scared when interviewing him? We've covered a bit of that, but maybe you can just answer again for Shelley, just briefly.
I wasn't scared of interviewing him. I don't know if that's me and my naivety. Kind of go all. I don't know how to explain it. I think after a while you get used to going into prisons and you get used to interviewing dangerous people. I did always try have someone close at hand, because obviously being a woman and doing it is slightly different, I think, to being a guy. No offense, Gerard, but it adds a layer that is kind of difficult to sort of comprehend. But I wasn't scared interviewing him. He did kind of come across as being quite harmless in a way. Yeah, it's. I don't know if he hated women so much as they posed. Things were fine when things were going well, but the minute that things weren't going well, that was when he started reacting the way he did. Yeah,
and do you get a sense that he was? I mean, he said to you that he would have continued. I mean, this was something he was enjoying. Is it?
I think enjoying might be a bit of a strong word. I think he saw it as a means to an end. Like, I need this to go away, and this is how I know to make it go away.
Okay.
I don't know, Gerard. You've been very quiet.
Oh, Gerard's muted himself.
Did it to myself. I mean, obviously, I didn't get the chance to interview him, so I mean, your sort of comments have much more weight than mine. But yeah, it just almost sounds the way you described it. It's just a lack of. It wasn't anger. It was just this is going to work. This did work. Let me do it again. It's just like matter of fact, practical.
Yeah. It was a solution to a problem.
I have one more question regarding the kind of on the interview front, and that would be, you're going in to interview somebody, that his victims have all been women, just talking about, the dynamics of whether you're a man or a woman in the space. Is that something you consider before going in, whether it would be preferable with what you know of this particular person to have a male or a female interviewer to do the job?
That is quite an interesting question, because on one hand, I think being a woman going into interview, especially men who've committed these kind of crimes, there's almost a softer side that I can call on that kind of maybe elicits a little bit more information. But then there's the attendant thing of I could be at risk as well. There's always that thought. And I think it's important to be aware of it and take precautions. But I think it's both a good and a bad thing. I think if some of the serial killers I interviewed, I think I could have definitely been more assertive and stronger. Some of them really needed that, but most of the time it worked quite well. And I can remember a couple of times I'd say to the team, how should I play this? Do you want me to go in like firmer and harder, or do you think that a more gentler approach would work? And it's interesting to hear what the rest of the team has to say. Occasionally I might have an officer with me. It just depended on what the case was. And then it was definitely a tag team of, good cop, bad cop that worked quite well. Sometimes it's a thing, even if they sit quietly in the corner looking menacingly, it does kind of help a bit. It's tricky. Hey, you kind of play each one as it goes. You go prepared and then you adapt as you go along.
Yeah. And very last question on this on the interview topic, but do you feel like as you evolve this muscle, whatever that muscle is in your brain, that you start to get how would you articulate getting that kind of just that instinct for it, for kind of knowing whether to go left or right in a discussion?
Experience, I suppose, a couple of blunders along the way, but it definitely becomes like a sixth sense. I can't quite explain it, but like they'll bring up something, and in my head I have to go, all right, I've got to keep that in mind, and then at some points I'll be like, okay, we need to go back to this. Oh, by the way, halfway through the interview, I have actually seen the docket, and I have looked at the crime scene photos. And interestingly enough, something you mentioned earlier made me think of something in the file, and then you kind of pull in that. So it's a couple of stages to the process. You've got to get them to sort of at least open up and talk to you, kind of build a little bit of trust with them, get them. And that's what one of the purposes of going through all the stuff at the beginning is to do that before you kind of hit the hard stuff and get them to open up about all of that. But it's also to take all the strands that they've given you and turn them into something that's cohesive. Yeah. So they'll give you little bits, and then you've got to literally sit there actively listening for while they're doing it and being able to piece together everything so that it comes out as one solid story at the end. And it requires a little bit of mental juggling. Yeah. But it's definitely like you hone it as you go along. It's something you can pick up. It's something you can learn. The detectives help a huge amount with that. Especially I found like if you exchange psychological knowledge with you, they'll exchange all the interviewing stuff with you. And then you can both work together on doing more psychological interviewing to the point that the detectives are then able to do some of it on their own, especially the IPS guys. Because they're so fully invested in the process and so into the idea of being able to do those interviews. Yeah. So it's a muscle that you work on and refine and get better at.
Yeah, and do you draw from your actual book learning as well, or is this a learn on the job skill, or are you partially equipped with exam in second year psych?
No. No. I think we get allotted a certain number of hours in our masters year to do forensic psych, but they typically don't let you anywhere near any accused people during that rotation. So I think it is very much like a baptism of fire when you come in, because you learn on the trot and it's like in the deep end straight from the beginning. There's no sort of like soft, gentle into the water slowly toe by toe. You get like shoved in the deep end and you learn to swim or sink. It's that simple.
And if I may, who was your first murderer, serial murderer?
Diego Novella.
Okay.
The very first one. So the guy who killed the Guatemalan man who killed his girlfriend in Camp Spain.
Yes. Okay.
I think that was like 3 weeks after I joined.
This is the one where he left feces around the body, yes. And where he
wrote things on her body using feces and stuff. But that was definitely, that was my first foray into proper investigative psychology work, and it was hectic because I think within the third week I got the full crime scene photos, and I just remember sitting at home thinking with the photos, which was not a really good idea. I learned that later. You leave them at the office and just sitting with them, and going through it and thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Yeah. But there's just something. I think you have to have the ability to see the darker side of what humans can do without necessarily knowing that you can go there and do it yourself. And it's a tiny bit of a knack, it's like, how can I put, I don't know how else to describe it. It's like you either get it or you don't.
Yeah. Gerard, your first was Quibus, yes? Geldenhuis. Would that have been? Is that right? Or did you
First
interview?
offender I interviewed, it would have
Yeah.
been, part of my master's. I can't remember, it was either Querbus, it was a serial murderer. It was either Querbus or
Yeah.
John Frank Brown or who else?
One of them.
Yeah, one of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you think that now that you guys have this knowledge, is it there? Is it something you need to practice?
I don't think it'll ever leave me.
Yeah.
I think it's indelibly etched in me now. I don't know what you think, Gerard, but it's
Yeah.
kind of like it's in my blood and my bones now.
Yeah, I think you can't forget it. I do think you can get a little bit out of practice if you haven't done it for a year or two, and you're now suddenly back. I think it all falls, like riding a bicycle, falls back into place quickly. But
Well, guys, I think we've been at it for a long time. We had a little bit of some technical glitches in the middle, so apologies to everyone for that. Like I say, we'll tidy that up for the rerun. So if you missed the live, then you missed all the fun halfway through the show where we disappeared for a little while. Apologies for that. Kirsten, what are your, is there a particular memory or a particular instance other than the tomatoes that stands out for you here? What is your kind of takeaway, your big takeaway from this particular case?
He was different. He wasn't the run of the mill. I felt this before. I know where this is going. I've heard this because a lot of the times it's similar phrases, it's similar expressions, it's similar ways of formulating things in their head, the way that they think. It's very similar, and you can kind of pick up patterns and pull out things that are like, okay, I know what type of person I'm dealing with. With him, it was definitely like, okay, this is odd. This just doesn't fit the pattern. This was interesting for me. And the fact that he had, while we were so clearly told that there's a hunting ground, there's a killing ground, there's a graveyard, I think this was so different because it blew a lot of those things out of the water. It was like, okay, this guy lures, kills, and buries in the same 100 meters. That was very different for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again. Gerard, thank you as well as always. We're going to wrap up now because I know Gerard's got to get off to a meeting and because it's obviously the middle of the day there in Canada. So Kirsten, thank you once again for joining us. We do appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon, no doubt, to talk about some more cases. So we appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us some of your first-hand experience of this particular case. And to the both of you guys, thank you and stay well. Gerard, we will,
everybody. Thanks, Kirsten.
I will see you next week. And then, guys, I will now wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. My name is Paul Llewellyn. You've been watching Profiler Africa. Like I say, apologies for all of that, for those technical glitches in the middle. That's never happened on Profiler. We do another rugby podcast, which you must check out. It's called That Rugby Union Show, hosted by my mates Kola and Sim. And we have the worst luck with that podcast, but Profiler's always been a lucky one, and we've not had to deal with the gremlins too much. But tonight they reared their head. Apologies for that. Do go ahead and hit the like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Please do share the podcast. You can also become a member if you'd like to contribute. Thank you to everyone that jumped on the chat tonight. We'll be back next week with more Profiler Africa. And like I always say, there's one thing you need to be aware of in South Africa, and that is that it's very difficult to trust anyone. So rather just trust nobody. Good night, everybody.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.